This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details. Grass. It's the mysterious green stuff that grows out of the rock you live on. What is it? How does it work? Nobody knows, but we're pretty sure that Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition needs more of it. Since its release, Xenoblade DE has been subject to some ridicule over the draw distance of its grass, with some saying that it's worse than the original, or at least worse than the other entries in the series. With that in mind, I decided to sit down with every Xenoblade, and not just every game, but every version, every sequel, and every expansion in the Xenoblade series for the expressed purpose of ranking the grass. I'm John Reardon, you're watching NWR TV. Join me as we determine which Xenoblade game has the best grass. Since its original release on the Wii, the Xenoblade series has earned a reputation for its vast fields of lush foliage. The standard definition of the initial Wii release made the grass draw distance difficult to even detect, so it wasn't a problem. Were one to complain about the draw distance of the original Xenoblade, they'd be more likely to complain about the draw distance on monsters, not foliage. When it was re-released on the 3DS, that draw distance became even less of an issue due to literally cutting the already low resolution in half, from 480 down to 240. Instead, we were just impressed that they managed to get it running on the 3DS at all. Xenoblade X was the first time we got to see the series in HD, via the severely underloved Wii U. And while there certainly were pop-in issues, foliage definitely wasn't the worst offender. In fact, while Xenoblade X is probably the most divisive game in the series, the expansive world was one thing that seemed to be universally appreciated. That and the killer flying music.
Over the world we see all the high walls. You cannot change, but we've got to try first. Miles and miles fly across our sky. Tonight's the time. Over the rainbow, glorious night. It's lighting.
Keep spinning chair. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles Torna the Golden Country would once again bring the series to a new system, and with it make significant changes to the engine once again. Here, the primary technical critique was of its occasionally aggressive dynamic resolution, which could in handheld mode drop the resolution below that of the original Xenoblade. Once again though, the grass was fine. Finally, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition takes the original game and brings it to the engine powering Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Torna, while still maintaining a large amount of legacy code. This is where the remaster gets complicated. You see, Xenoblade DE makes extensive use of the original game's code, assets, and animation. While tons of new features have been added, including depth of field, motion blur, ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, and new character models, there is also a lot that's still tied to that Wii-era code. Things that no doubt the Switch could handle way better if this were truly a game designed for Switch. Draw distance on foliage is certainly one of those things. So let's break down how each game actually handles grass, because each one is a little different. On Wii and 3DS, there wasn't a straight cutoff point for grass, but rather two main phases. At all times, there is a circle of grass around Shulk and the party, with a second smaller circle inside that includes additional grass and fine details like little flowers. This means there isn't a solid wall of grass, but rather a sort of fade. Combine this with the 480p resolution, and honestly, the grass pop-in is kinda hard to notice. Keep in mind this is just grass. Things like shrubs would draw way earlier, as we can see if we look out across Gower Plain. Surprisingly, the 3DS version actually maintains seemingly the exact same draw distance and system for grass. Granted, at 240p, this is way harder to see, and I really had to watch pixels closely to see when grass was popping in at all. Real quick, let's stop and look at what grass actually is in the Xenoblade games. Every game in the series uses flat 2D alpha transparencies to represent grass. Think of them like tiny billboards with pictures of grass on them that always face the camera. So in the original Xenoblade, individual little alpha transparencies would load in along the edge of the circle around the camera, while those that went outside the range of the camera would be removed. That means that there is always a pretty consistent amount of grass loaded in no matter how big the environment is. Xenoblade X, rather than constantly loading individual alpha transparencies around the player, loads them up in chunks. This means that rather than seeing a wall of grass spawning in ahead of you, you'll occasionally see a block of several transparencies show up at once. Now, as I mentioned earlier, pop-in was a real issue for Xenoblade X, both in terms of geometry and textures, so it's hard to complain too much about grass, which, while it doesn't appear that far from the camera, is hardly the greatest pop-in sin being committed. It's important to remember when comparing Xenoblade X to the rest of the series that it represents not only the largest, but only seamless world in the entire series. In fact, to this day, it remains one of the largest non-procedural game worlds in the entirety of video games, which is really cool. If you want to know more, search Xenoblade X world size, and you should come up with one of my videos from back when that game was coming out, where we compared it to the world size of a bunch of other games and some real-world places, and people got upset. And it was great. Good times. Fun times were had by all. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles Torna go back to loading individual transparencies rather than blocks of grass. Also similar to the original, they bring back the multi-leveled approach, though this time the base draw distance is farther out, and the secondary draw for additional detail isn't far behind it. The higher resolution does make this significantly more noticeable than it was in the original on Wii, but the draw distance is respectable, especially considering the density of grass, which is much higher than it ever has been before. Torna the Golden Country maintains the same draw distance as the base game, which should come at no surprise, but I still had to check. So now we've made it all the way back around to Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. What is going on with the grass? Like I said before, much of Xenoblade DE is limited by that old Wii code lurking beneath the surface, and I think the grass is no exception. The maximum draw distance is the same as the Wii version, but some changes have indeed been made. Remember how Xenoblade on Wii and 3DS used two distinct phases to load in Foliage? Well, Xenoblade DE doesn't do that. Or rather, the draw distance on that secondary phase is pushed out to what would appear to be the same point as the first, effectively meaning there is one much thicker pass which eliminates that pleasant fade-in effect the original utilized. What's odd is that on a technical level, this actually means the raw draw distance is better than the original, but artistically when combined with HD rendering, it comes off as looking worse because it's so obvious. Rather than a fade, we get a wall of grass at a distance that, while technically better than the original, was still calibrated for an SD display. It's hard to tell due to the texture change on the grass itself, but it also appears that the grass may be denser than it was in the original. Once again, this makes it technically better, but winds up looking artistically worse. I did wonder if perhaps Future Connected, the new expansion included in DE, might shrug off this limitation, but alas, the draw distance appears to be the same there. I had hoped that since, while Future Connected does use an environment cut from the original Xenoblade, its lack of a tether to the Wii might free it from grass limitations, but alas, it was not to be. So like I said, this is about ranking the best of the best, so we need to decide a winner for the best grass in all of Xenoblade. The way I see it, you can kind of approach this from two angles. There is the technological winner, the grass that is the most technically ambitious and successful in that regard. This would be the game with the farthest draw distance on grass, the densest grass, just the best looking technically grass. And then there is the aesthetic winner, the artistic winner. This would be the grass for which the pop-in is the least noticeable, where the grass just sort of blends into the game and you don't even notice that there is a draw distance on the grass because it is so just aesthetically pleasing. Alright, so we're gonna have two winners. So first, the best grass on a technical level, which I would have to give to Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles Torna the Golden Country. These two, by a significant margin, have the farthest draw distance with the luscious grass in the entire series. They also make use of a multi-leveled approach, though they're both far enough out that you do still get a definite wall of grass along the edge of the draw distance. As for the aesthetic winner, I'm gonna have to go with Xenoblade Chronicles 3D. Now you may think I'm crazy, you may shout that this is by far the ugliest Xenoblade, but let me ask you this. Find the grass draw distance. Do it. Look at this video and tell me where the grass is popping in. I'll zoom in. Can you find it? Because it took me a really long time. I stared at this footage for a long time, going frame by frame, pixel by pixel to track the individual tufts of grass to find out when they were disappearing. The grass in Xenoblade Chronicles 3D is so far beyond what that system is capable of showing you that the draw distance is just a non-issue. It's virtually impossible to find. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at Xenoblade Grass. Hopefully now, next time your friends come up to you and are like, hey, let's have a learned discussion about grass and foliage rendering in Xenoblade, you'll be like, great, I am fully equipped to have this discussion. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like so that other people can find it and also receive the same knowledge you have. That's always good. We need to spread this wisdom. Feel free to leave a comment if you have your own opinions about foliage of any sort. It doesn't have to be grass, it could be trees. Do you want to talk about how the leaves don't move in Xenoblade Chronicles DE? Because that's a thing that has caused some uproar. That might have to be its own video. Anyway, comment, like, subscribe. You know how the internet works. Do all the internet things. While you're doing that, you follow me on Twitter. That'd be fine. Maybe there's just a Twitter handle somewhere on the screen. Oh, look, there it is. There it is right there. Hello, Twitter handle. You could follow that. Have you finished writing it down yet? I can keep it up there for longer. So once again, thank you very much for watching. My name's John Reardon, and I will see you next time. Bye. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.